Annual Meeting of the Northport Village Corporation is now called to order this day, Tuesday, August 14, 2018. In the name of the state of Maine, you are welcomed and notified that the inhabitants of the Northport Village Corporation in Waldo County, Maine, qualified by law to vote in village affairs, gathered here at the Community Hall in Bayside on this Tuesday, the 14th day of August, 2018, at 6:30 in the evening. Then and there to act upon the articles named and posted in the annual warrant posted by Officer Michael Boucher of the Northport Village Corporation at least 7 days prior to this meeting and published in newspapers of general circulation at least 7 days prior to this meeting. Our first article of business is the election of a moderator by written ballot to preside at this meeting. Does the nominating committee have a nominee?
We do. We nominate Timothy Severn.
Are there any nominations from the floor? There are no nominations from the floor. The nominating committee casts a ballot for the moderator. Tim, I will now swear you moderator. Do you, Timothy Samuel, swear that you will support the Constitution of the United States and of the state so long as you should continue a citizen thereof, so help you God?
I do.
Do you swear that you will faithfully discharge to the best of your abilities the duties incumbent on you as moderator for this meeting according to the bylaws of the Northport Village Corporation, so help you God?
Thank you. Just give me a minute to put this on. And I presume the mic check is all right. The first thing I want to do is introduce Adelaide Lincoln. Adelaide Lincoln has been coming to Bayside from Massachusetts to her home for 89 consecutive summers. She's living in a family home that is 123 years old, 6 generations. This is still primarily a seasonal community, and for 89 consecutive summers, we have had the pleasure of Adelaide being here, and we would ask you if you would honor us by leading the beginning of the meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Adelaide. I'll make some introductions, go over the requirements for voter eligibility, read the rules of procedure for tonight's meeting, and then we'll discuss and vote on the warrant articles as listed on pages 6 through 10 in the annual report. The copies are in the back if you don't have the annual report, and there is also a supplement to the annual report. Be sure to pick up that page. It's a supplement for Article 5 and Article 18. Okay. This is probably a good time to remind all of us to turn off the phones, and also no texting. Let's keep the distractions to a minimum. Before I make the introductions, let's take a moment to remember those family members, friends, and neighbors who have passed away in the last year. The clerk will read the names. Please let us know if there are any additional names that should be added to this year's clerk's report. Okay.
David G. Bryant, Nate Hopwood, Derek Cressy, Catherine Gary, Curtis Holmes, Scott A. Mills, Scott Ladd Mills, Eleanor Moscow, Christopher Muldoon, Joe Pendleton, Skip Pendleton, Betty Shivels, and Betty Wilson.
Are there any other names that should be added to that clerk's report? Thank you, Dean. My name is Tim Samway, and I'll be the moderator for this year's annual meeting. The elected officers of the Northport Village Corporation are the clerk, Maureen Einstein, the treasurer, Steve Pazlonis, and the president of the Village Corporation is John Spritz. The overseers here present are Vicki Matthews, Michael Lannon, Richard Brockway, Judy Metcalf, and Wendy Huntoon. Paul Nyron is absent at the moment. Also present tonight is Bill Page, who is our village agent, Amy Eldridge, who is in the back, who is our office manager, and the person who put together this year's excellent report. Thank you, Amy. And Mike Boucher, who is the chief law enforcement officer of the village. Some thank you, Steve Trenholm, putting up the patriotic bunting, and I presume Joe Riley is responsible for the large flag. Thank you, and to Ned Leitner for setting up the video and the sound, and it's being simulcast on NPR, but don't tell anybody of that. But thank you, Ned, and it's also appropriate that this year's annual report is dedicated to Ned, as thank you for all the work that he has done. I had a note. Voting regulations. To be a voter at this meeting, you must meet the following criteria. First, you must be of legal voting age, that is 18. Next, your name must appear on the deed of property within the boundaries of the Northport Village Corporation, or you must be a full-time resident within the Village Corporation and eligible to be a voter in the town of Northport. There's one seating section here tonight, but only those who have been handed a voting card should be voting. I'm looking for mine. If you do not have a voting card and think you are eligible for one, please go back to the registrars and to see if your name is on the checklist. If you think you deserve a voting card but does not receive one, you can appeal that decision at this meeting. And if you have been mistakenly given a voting card, please either return the card or refrain from using it to vote. The voting here at this annual meeting has largely been on the honor system, and we expect everybody to honor the system. The rules of procedure for tonight's meeting. All speakers must first be recognized by the moderator, and the speaker should address all remarks to the moderator. All speakers should use the microphone, we'll put that back in the center, please, and should clearly state their name for the clerk to record. All speakers should be brief with their remarks and should stay on the subject being discussed. Any lengthy motion or amendment must be submitted to the moderator or the clerk in writing. Any discussions or motions regarding reconsideration must be made in a timely manner. Rulings by the moderator can be overturned by a majority vote. As a reminder, this is an open meeting of the Northport Village Corporation. It is not an overseers meeting. Everyone who is a voter should feel that they have the right and the privilege to speak, to ask questions, make motions, and at any time ask for clarification. The moderator's job is to make sure that all voters have their say and to be fair in all rulings. Additional reminders are that the moderator will be the one to call the questions and will do so only after all the voters have had their opportunity to speak. And the moderator will also be the one to ask for a motion to adjourn and will do so after all the business of this meeting has been completed. A reminder again, rulings by the moderator can be overturned by majority vote, and anyone can ask for clarification at any time. And if anybody has any questions, this would be a good time to ask. If not, we will start with Article 2, which is the President's Report. Mr. Spritz?
Thank you. I'd like to stand, but I think this microphone doesn't allow me to, so I'll sit here. One of the pleasures of being president is that every year at this time, lots of people look at me and say, "Who is that guy?" Because no matter how many times I sit up here, perhaps, or preside at our monthly meetings, a lot of people know my name. I'm John Spritz, and I live next door to the Von Bergens, who are sitting here. And I just want to make one minor addition to your statement, Mr. Moderator. Also, Lee Hope is not here tonight, who is another one of our overseers. So Paul Nyman, the other book, unfortunately not with us this evening. I had comments which I wrote, as did all the committee members and the treasurer, and many other individuals too, that are in the annual report. You can read them at your leisure. They're on pages 14 and 15. I don't need to go into the substance of that now. I will remind everyone who is elected an overseer this evening for the coming year or years that following this meeting, the clerk will meet us downstairs for a swearing in. So if you are elected an overseer tonight, don't run out the door afterwards. Join us downstairs for that. And I'd like to invite everybody here, and let anybody else know who you'd like them to come also, that our next meeting, as last year, our next meeting of the Board of Overseers will be not downstairs here, but at the Dreamwater School this coming Sunday at 8 a.m. Last year, when the school was brand new, they invited us to come. It was a wonderful time there. And it's good just to be in a different space. So if you have nothing to do with 8 o'clock this coming Sunday or issues you'd like to raise, join us down at the school. I think we're going to be in the auditorium. I'm not sure. We'll figure it out when we get inside. I think we'll be the only Board of Overseers meeting on Sunday morning, so you should be able to find us without any trouble. It's a nice occasion to pontificate now, but I won't do that. Instead, I will say that another one of the delights of being president is that I get to interact with lots of great people across the community. Some of whom I've known for a while, some of whom I meet all the time, anew. And one of the people I've known for a few years and gotten to know well is our moderator, Tim Samway. Although, I'll be honest, I only know him in context of Bayside. We don't hang out outside of this community. But Tim is a regular, positive gadfly at our meetings and keeps us often on track and raises points of order that we might want to think of, the overseers. And he does a lot for this community. I'm not to tell you that. Among other things, he has been serving as moderator for more years than he should have to. And he and I have been actively engaged in trying to find a replacement. We haven't found one yet, but I always am thankful to Tim for the work he does as moderator. It's a key part, obviously, of what makes these annual meetings go. And he and his family, and he and his family have been very involved and engaged in the Village of Bayside, as I'm sure you know. Therefore, on behalf of the overseers and the officers of the Northport Village Corporation, we have a little gift for Tim. I'll give it to him right now. I made this beautiful model. No, I think we all know that once a model starts showing up, it's got Dick Broadway's fingerprints all over it. This is a Dick Broadway model of the library, which the Samway family was very involved in helping to get off the ground, literally off the ground. And so this is a gift for Tim in appreciation for all that he and his family have given to Bayside through the years, and will continue to do so. Thank you, sir. That concludes my remarks, and I'll hand things over to Mr. Treasurer.
Thanks, Sean. Well, welcome everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Steve Castellanos. I've been the treasurer for the past 3 years and was an overseer for 7 years before that. I have the dubious distinction about talking about money, how we spend it, why we spend it, and all that other fun stuff. So for those of you who looked at the report, this will be a quick summary. We have really two buckets. One is an operating budget that is the nuts and bolts of what we do. We have street lights, we have a village agent, we have postage expenses. All those things repeat on an annual basis, and those don't change greatly. Some line items go up, and some line items go down. The second bucket are village projects, and those are maintaining your roads, doing repairs to the community hall, taking care of tree removal as trees age and become a danger in their own right. So in the past few years, we've been very fortunate to have a windfall of about $23,000 that had been used to pay interest on a bond. The Maine bond bank does something called refunding, which is essentially reducing the amount of interest payments.
He didn't do that.
Essentially the amount of interest payments. So we're able to apply all those funds to doing improvements of the community hall and to roads and other infrastructure projects within the village. Of particular note, all the windows in the community hall were redone over the past 2 years. The cost of that project was almost $17,000. But because of the generosity of many of you in this room, only $1,900 was tax dollars. Everything else that paid for that project came out of donations. And that's pretty remarkable when you think about it. So for the first time in many years, the overseers are proposing an increase in the budget. And the reason for that increase is in spite of all the work that's been done on infrastructure projects, those needs don't go away. There's going to come a point in time not too far down the road where we need to repaint the community hall. That's 7 years away maybe. We're going to need to repave all the paved roads in the village. That might be 8 years away. But those expenses continue. One of the things that we're doing that is, I think, a particularly positive addition is the overseers have asked for approval of 2 additional hydrants in the village that are driven off the water system. You may not be aware of the fact that the hydrant system in this village for years has been a gravity-fed system coming out of a fire pond up on Wolf Road. So last year we added 1 hydrant and we're going to add 2 additional hydrants. Now that's a really good thing to do. I don't see anybody here who would disagree with that. But it also costs you $900 a hydrant year after year after year in hydrant rental and maintenance. A really good spend, but it's an increase in what we need to do. The refunding I mentioned earlier expired this year. So we enjoyed that windfall for 3 years. That's come to an end. So now we're going to start spending $9,000 a year in interest again until that bond is retired. So to try to make sure that this tax increase was as small as it could possibly be, but still allow us to do all the work that needs to be done, the overseers made some adjustments to the budget, and they're recommending that we cease putting contributions into reserves. That amounts to $10,000 a year. That doesn't mean that we won't be sensitive to reserves. That does not mean that money may not flow to reserves, but we're not intentionally going to rebuild those because we're in a position where we're healthy. We have somewhat slightly over $300,000 of reserves available. That's a very healthy number. We're discontinuing a contribution to sewer in the amount of $5,000 that has been made for a very long time. I think it started at $15,000 for a number of years, came down to $10,000, and was probably reduced 6 or 7 years ago to the current number. These were pulled out not because the overseers said, well, we're going to go grab money wherever we can. These were very deliberative decisions, very well considered decisions, looking for ways to do things that didn't compromise the quality of life in the village, but also prevented a larger tax increase. And the last piece, I guess, is a look at the years ahead. So we have the seawall that's going to need to be repaired, replaced here in the coming, hopefully the coming year. It's going to be an expensive project. I am hopeful that we can use a combination of reserves and some changes in our bonds to prevent future tax increases. Now, it's a very, very rough idea as to how this might work. Depending on how much money we borrow, we can pull money from reserves to make those bond payments. Not a bad thing at all. In 6 years, we have the bond that you all approved, Rebuild the Wharf, that will be paid off. That gives us $35,000 a year in funds that we don't need to spend anymore. So that begins picking up the bond and rebuilding reserves. The year after that, there's a second bond that is over, and that's a $22,000 per year payment. So what that means is if you look 6 or 7 years down the road, there's going to be a lot of free cash that can be used for all those other projects I mentioned without a need for a tax increase, because you're already including that money in the tax payments you make today. So this is very preliminary. I can't guarantee that that's going to work, but I'm pretty confident that some combination of reserves will allow us to maintain current tax rates for a while to come. That's all I have.
Any questions on the Treasurer's report? We'll go to Article 4. Article 4 is to see what sums of money the Northport Village Corporation will raise and appropriate for the following accounts for fiscal 2019. The money will be raised as follows. $25,000 will be requested from the town of Northport as part of the warrants for the town's annual meeting. The Northport Village Corporation expects to raise $8,700 other revenue, $6,000 from utility rent, $2,000 from interest, and $700 from community hall rental. The balance, $216,599, is to be raised from the village property tax. If the $25,000 warrant is not approved by the voters of the town of Northport, $250,299 will be raised from the village property tax. Do we have a motion to see what sums of money the Northport Village Corporation will raise and appropriate for fiscal 2019?
I move that we raise and appropriate the sum of $250,299, and that is the amount, is the same dollar figure that's outlined in the proposed budgets on pages 11, 12, and 13.
Do we have a second? Yeah, not a problem. Discussion on Article 4. Mr. Castellanos?
Well, as I mentioned before, most of the increases are directly related to infrastructure projects. And if you were to look at individual lines, the road budget for this year was $15,000. That's increasing to $22,800. Infrastructure, where we had $32,000 to spend over the past couple of years to work on different projects, we dramatically reduced because we've got the village to a point where it can maintain itself pretty well for the foreseeable future. When you roll it all together, it's about $16,000 in increases.
Any questions or comments on Article 4? Hearing none. All those in favor of raising and appropriate the sum of $250,299 for fiscal year 2019, please vote yes. All those opposed, motion carries. Article 5 is some corrections changed, but that's listed not in the annual report, but there's a supplemental warrant that was passed out at the end of the meeting. But Article 5 is the corrected version to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to appropriate and authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to borrow on behalf of the Northport Village Corporation and/or expended funds from accumulated surpluses, a principal amount not to exceed $216,599 in anticipation of 2019 taxes, and to issue and sell for that purpose general obligation bonds and notes of the Northport Village Corporation, the proceeds to be used for the purpose of providing working capital for governmental activities of the corporation. Such bonds and notes to be issued upon further terms and conditions as may be determined by a majority at least of the overseers of the Northport Village Corporation. Do I have a motion on Article 5?
I move Article 5 as read.
Do we have a second? Mrs. Huntoon, second the motion. Article 5, Mr. Castellanos, would you like to address that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a recurring warrant that we see every year. It's a safety net in the event that we need some cash between the annual meetings. All the spending that's done in this village is approved by you at this annual meeting. If something comes up that's unexpected, the overseers have no funds to use without your approval. The likelihood of us calling another emergency meeting, getting them all together to put together some kind of a warrant to approve that spending is highly unlikely. So this is a safety net. It's a safety net that has not been used in the 10 years I've been involved in village government. It's increased slightly over prior years because it mirrors what we collect for taxes. So last year I think it was $202,000. This year it's $260,000.
Any questions on Article 5? All those in favor of Article 5 as read? All those opposed? Motion carries. I will preface this by saying Article 6 and 7, you'll please have to forgive me, but the state law does require that they be read in their entirety. Actually, they asked to be read in their entirety twice, but we'll forget that. We'll just do it once. Article 6 is to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to borrow on behalf of the Northport Village Corporation a principal amount not to exceed $500,000 and to issue and sell general obligation bonds and notes of the Northport Village Corporation for that purpose and/or expend funds from accumulated surpluses, the combined borrowing and use of surplus funds not to exceed $500,000. For replacement and repair of community hall and wharf as needed, repairs to utilities operated by the Village Corporation, for reconstruction of shoreland damage to property owned by the Village Corporation, or repairs of roads owned by the corporation. Such bonds and notes to be issued upon such further terms of conditions as may be determined by a majority of the overseers of the Northport Village Corporation, and further to authorize the overseers to accept and expend federal and/or state grants, execute any and all contracts and documents, and take any and all actions necessary or convenient to issue the bonds and notes of the Northport Village Corporation and accomplish the project. Motion.
I move Article 6 as read.
Seconded. Ms. Huntoon. Mrs. Metcalf, would you address Article 6, please?
This is the emergency repairs authorization that we seek from you every year. We, under our charter, have the ability to have an emergency meeting to get you all together to give us this authority, but we can only do that in July and August. So, we need this vote just in case, cross our fingers. It has been modified over the years to expand the nature of the assets that we want to have protection for. It was the only safe community hall, then we added the wharf, then we said, what about the roads, the utilities? So we've tried to think of everything that we care about and that makes this a good village. This year you will see that it's a bigger number than you've ever noticed before. We put it up to $250,000 last year. We're doubling that this year. If there's going to be an emergency, it's going to be a catastrophic emergency, and we want to have the resources needed to reverse that.
Any questions or comments on Article 6? Yes.
We're anticipating, I
Go ahead.
just stand up. The doubling of it, we're anticipating major catastrophes now?
Yes.
Why do we decide we should double it?
It's premised upon the value of the assets that we are that we're trying to protect. So when we look at what the value of the community hall, the wharf, and the other assets are that might be washed away from the storm or might burn down, or
It's been determined that those things have doubled in value over the last year?
we think we have undervalued in the past. We're trying to get more to reality.
Okay.
We also have insurance, and we will not ignore such things as insurance, but we will mostly hope and pray that those storms don't happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other comments or questions on Article 6? Hearing none, all those in favor of Article 6 as read? All those opposed? Motion carries. Article 7, to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to use the balance of reserves in excess of expenses at the end of 2018 and/or to draw from reserves to complete the infrastructure projects planned and approved by the overseers for fiscal 2018. Withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $18,100. This warrant will be executed only if the projects listed below cannot be completed by December 31, 2018. Motion on Article 7. Mr. Spritz?
I approve Article 7 as read.
A second. Mrs. Metcalf? Judy? Oh, no. Kaz, you're going to address Article 7, excuse me.
Yeah, this is a unique one. The plan is to do all that work before the end of this year, but we're also recognizing the contractor is very, very busy, and that we may not be able to complete all of the work by the end of the calendar year. You may remember that your authorization for spending is for a fiscal year that goes from January 1st to December 31st. So anything that isn't done by December 31st, we can't use that money. And that money automatically rolls to reserves. That's the way it has always been. We know that when we do electrical in the community hall, there's a question as to whether that contractor can get all the work done by the end of the year. He may need to do some in the spring to get it caught up. There's a lot of road work planned. There's a question as to whether we can get that all done in this calendar year. So the infrastructure committee, the overseers are working to get that all completed, and cross your fingers it will all be done by December 31st, and this warrant goes away. However, if these projects aren't completed, the money that would normally roll to reserves would then be available to the overseers to complete these projects early next year.
Any questions or comments on Article 7?
I think it is important to note that it is only these projects for which that money will become available. So it's not a slush fund or a pool to dip into. It is exclusively to commit these particular projects.
Okay. So in that case, it is not for the electrical upgrade in this building, because that's not all.
That is correct, yes. Yeah, that will be done this year.
Just,
Yeah, no, so I misspoke on that one. We have so many moving pieces on this, I have a hard time keeping them all together.
but so if that project is not completed within this year's budget, is there money to finish it in the spring?
Only if we can find room in the contingency funds that are going to be approved or were approved earlier tonight.
Mr. Webster?
Could you provide some clarification on what the difference is between the significant increases in the budget, for example, for wharf maintenance, $11,000 increase this year, versus what's included in this item here, which is, I don't know, $4,000?
Sure, two pieces. First the budget for what I'll call ongoing wharf expenses. We've never gotten that budget as high as it needs to be. Every year we have gone from contingency to cover the expenses of the wharf, and that has generally included the repairs we have to do in the spring at the causeway. It includes all the mooring repairs and float repairs for the swim float and the boat float. the installation and removal of the swing float and the boat float. That's the nuts and bolts pieces. A few years ago, we started having annual inspection done and doing preventative maintenance on the wharf. And that's an expense that we just never budgeted correctly, frankly. So the budgeted number you see in the core budget covers those expenses. This additional $4,000 is to get us a step ahead of that process. Right now, what we do is we wait for the inspector to identify the fact that a cross member is damaged and needs to be replaced, that a bolt is rusted and needs to be taken care of. What the infrastructure committee would like to do is replace a segment of all the bolts in a given part of the wharf in a given year. So we might do it, I'm making it up because we don't know exactly how far this will go. Once Proc sets up to do this work, a lot of their expense is purely in bringing the barge in and getting ready to go. And then the incremental work they do is not all that expensive. So we can replace, for example, 1/3 of the bolts every year. Then we eliminate some of the ongoing kind of catch-up repairs, which is the approach we use today. So that's, and I hope that answers your question. It does not take another stab at it.
Oh, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on Article 7? Yes, Mr. Burley. I didn't hear the question.
Could you tell us where West Street is?
Where is West Street?
Sure, West Street goes up to the golf course. If you were at the top of Clinton, there's a street that almost looks like it isn't a street anymore. That's West Street.
Is that the one at the bottom? It starts at Gordon Fuller's and goes up to the golf course? Got it? Yes. I didn't hear the question.
My name's Mike Lynn, I'm the chair of the infrastructure committee. West Street and Upper Clinton will be done together because they do come together with the golf course. The issue is that we do not have adequate drainage right now on the side of the roads to deal with stormwater. West Street in particular, it runs right down the middle of the road, which is probably the least ideal alternative. And it actually runs then across the street and has flooded some of the homes on the other side of George Street. So the goal with this, and the reason why West is more than the other ones is we actually have to build West Street up and build a long ditch along the side of it for the drainage so we can get it down into another ditch that runs along George Street. Like I said, that will be done together with Upper Clinton because we do have to put some other drainage in up by the golf course to actually get it to run in both things. I'd just like to point out that we've spent some money on paving and other things in the past, and this year the goal was to really look at some of the smaller little roads that really we have neglected for a long time. And a lot of these budgets were put together to fix these roads, specifically because we have been spending a lot of money on gravel, putting it down, and then cleaning it up as it washes away. And the goal here is to really reduce the impact on the annual roads budgets by putting in a drainage that has been neglected on these little roads for some time.
Any other questions or comments on Article 7? Yes, Ms. Bauer?
Sheila Bauer again. So the project involved drainage as well as paving in all three of the examples?
Yes, oh, no, not paving.
Just drainage and paving roads?
I think so. I heard what you said is resurfacing. They will be resurfaced, but it will be all dirt roads, yes. None of this is paving.
Drainage is the main function.
The main point of this is to get the drainage in and then to rebuild the surface of the road to the right level.
Makes sense, thank you.
Any other questions or comments on Article 7? Hearing none, all those in favor of Article 7 is read. All those opposed, motion carries. Article 8, to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to withdraw from reserves to fund consulting and engineering studies for the repair of the seawall, withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $25,000. Motion on Article 8 by Mr. Landon. Second,
I have a question.
Mr. Matthews.
Mr.
Mr. Landon, would you address, go ahead, Mr.
I mean, I only have a question on
Mr. Landon will address Article 8 first and then ask any questions.
So, Article 8 is to authorize $25,000 from the reserves for the next step in the seawall process. This process started about 3 years ago. Anybody who's been downstairs here in the office has seen Dick Brockway's wonderful models of the different options down there. There was an option report that was done where there were all the alternatives that are shown down there were evaluated. Essentially, they all moved forward except for one. One of the options was to consider planting seagrass along the wharf there instead of having a wall, and everybody knows that. Anybody who's been here in the winter knows that in our nation would not do well with the seagrass alternative. So that was the only one that was really eliminated. The rest had moved forward to be further evaluated. This summer, there was a group of, we had solicited engineers. We put together what we thought was a pretty good team, or they did. It was engineers, landscape architects, and actually Steve, who does the seawall, our wharf maintenance. So they were hired to examine all the remaining alternatives. And we went through multiple infrastructure committee meetings. These were all meetings where we had a scoping meeting where we discussed what was going to be done. We discussed the draft report. We discussed the final report, and really each month at overseers meeting, we also discussed the progress and had discussed sort of what the options were and how we were moving forward. And then on June 23rd, we had a public meeting in this room where the design firm had come in and presented their report to us. It was very interesting. It was somewhat eye-opening in the sense that I think a lot of us were looking at, should we replace it exactly the way that it is, or should we look at some of these other alternatives? And it was interesting as it talked about the historical nature of the park and how the historical nature of the park isn't just what was there today, but also some of the other options fit that also. It really whittled it down. Their presentation whittled it down to 4 alternatives that were remaining. And there was a straw poll done at that meeting, and that was sort of whittled down to 2 that the public that attended that meeting. Not everybody at this meeting was there, obviously. Were sort of the favorites at that time. After that, the infrastructure committee had met again and sort of looked at those alternatives. And one of the major factors that I think came into play was looking at some of the geotech work that might be required that wasn't necessarily in the budget of that. Really all of them, but the Stillmore Fatman would require some sort of really serious geotech because we have a lot of clay out there and so on. So that was the recommended alternative that had moved forward. But I'd just like to point out that that's not the end here. Okay, we also have met since that time, and we are looking at the possibility of some of the other alternatives in the sense that we do plan to take a portion of this money, probably 10%, min-max of 10%, really no more than that, and do a peer review of the recommendation as it is, and really try to see where this goes. The main thing I'd like to point out is that what we're really talking about here is offering funds to complete this work. The 4 alternatives that were recommended, each one included some aspect of parking, whether the parking would have to be moved, or it would be eliminated, or it would be put somewhere else. And the main thing that came into play at that meeting was that no matter which one of these options we looked at, there are parking alternatives to year now to decide this, because we're not going to actually do the work until 2020's budget. So next year at this time, we'll be approving, hopefully, a firm budget to do whatever the design is that we're doing. This article is to continue the discussion, to have the peer review done, and then to take sort of the alternative and move forward with that over the next year and get a firm budget and the final result.
Before I just want to emphasize one thing, okay? That this article is written is about using the reserves to fund the consulting and the engineering studies. It's not, Article 8 is not about a design, and this article is not intended to be a public hearing about a design. The Article 8 was written to give the overseers the authority for the funding, for the engineering studies for the repair of the seawall. So, Mr. Fuller?
I had a question.
Go ahead.
My question was, would this funding be limited to only the ones that have been presented so far, or would it include any additional input that could be derived? Options, additional options.
For the 25,000?
Yes.
My hope is that we can come to some resolution on the preferred alternative sooner rather than later, so that we minimize our design costs. I don't think we want to design 4 or 5 different options. But that said, we are considering pulling some of that money out for this peer review. I call it peer review, but it's also to get some costing from other constructors to really look at some of these other options.
Thank you.
Mr. Fuller?
With Fuller, I think I've got it now, Mike, just a little bit more clarification. So, we're not talking about further engineering studies on 1 or 2 options right now. We're talking about there's still several options on the table, and at some point in time, there'll be some more public interaction, is that correct? And then we will move forward with what the majority wants, or could you go down that road as though? There's still several options on the table that this money would be spent.
Right. I think that right now, we're leaning towards the storm event because of the geotech work, okay? That doesn't mean that we have decided exclusively on that. And again, the point of the peer review is to get another opinion on the potential costs and so on. Because when we did have the meeting here, the infrastructure committee discussed it, and at that meeting, the storm event was significantly less than some of the other alternatives. And I think that at the meeting, that could have influenced people on the strong hold that suggested that that was the alternative that was preferred. So to make sure that it's not just because this one data point that suggests this is the cost is the way we're going to go, we're going to do this peer review, I think, which will help a lot. So yes, other options are still on the table. I do not think we would go beyond the 4 that were recommended there. And I really think we're kind of limited to sort of a little bit more like in-kind and revetment, only again because of the geotech work. Anything that's going to have a firm wall is going to require a lot of potential work there, and that is an unknown cost. So. And I really don't want to get into every alternative today. It's really to get the money approved so that we can continue the discussion. None of this is going to be done by dark night. We are going to do this throughout next summer, and we're going to talk about the options. If storm preventment is the preferred alternative, then we're going to go down the pathway of what do we do now about parking, which would be a totally different discussion. You know, whether it should cars be there, should the circle be pulled back? If we pull back the circle, what does that mean? There are a bunch of those things, and that's what this money is for, is to try to determine whether that's feasible or not.
Mrs. Schmitz?
Elaine Smith. Was the June presentation the only time that we got to see what the alternatives were other than downstairs? Because I came in downstairs and there was still a pamphlet down there, and some of those alternatives were no longer being considered, and it was very, very confusing. So I would have thought that maybe there would have been either some
days that we've been having are open to the public, and everybody's invited to attend. I ask for everybody's input as we move forward, through the next few days. Please come. Please call in. I can, especially in the winter months, I can do a call-in number, and you can be included if they want to. That's simple and easy enough to do. And then obviously the overseers meeting, we discuss the project during my report every month, which again is another place for that, and we have time before and after. Relative to the public presentation, in the interest of being sort of fiscally responsible, we had sort of beat up the engineer to limit the cost to our $15,000 limit. They wanted more than that, and one of the ways to do that was to agree to only one public meeting where they would attend. So that was the one public meeting. That was actually recorded by our person of the year here, and dedication. And actually, I believe it was distributed on the website, and there was also the reports were available on Bayside, Maine.com. And I encourage you to take a look at those, now still, because again, we went sort of whittled down to 4, and sort of went to one that we like, but still looking at other things, so there's still time to look at.
Over here. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. Okay, so terminology here. Am I understanding then that the peer reviews are just a way of getting additional cost analysis on several of the options that you're looking at?
It would be costs, and it would be opinions about constructability and a comparison of them back and forth. Yes.
And I think I heard you mention that there'll be contractors then weighing in during that peer review. Is that? I thought I heard the word contractors.
Yeah, I mean, the team that we hired, they had someone on the team
Right.
that actually constructs these things.
Right.
But we were going to go out to another firm that constructs, that's more local, that basically sort of a local second opinion of.
Okay.
Because
So just sort of backing up.
as you know, here in Maine, I hear a lot of, that's not the way we do it here. So we're going to get an opinion from somebody that does it here, the way they do it, and we'll compare that to what we have on the floor.
Okay. So it's just sort of, okay, backing up.
Mrs. Huntoon?
So I just want to make a little bit of a clarification. At the July meeting, the Board of Overseers did make a motion and voted to approve accepting the revertment of the riprap as the primary option for the seawall. So I believe what we're talking about is confirming through that peer review that is the appropriate option to go forward with. It doesn't mean that there are specific options associated with parking, because that design has not been done. The actual design for that revertment has not been done yet either. I just did feel it was important to make sure that we did clarify that the preferred option is the revertment seawall that was sort of went through the process of the infrastructure committee. It did with the various meetings and review of the design, the engineering study by the regional company that we
To help clarify that a little bit further is the peer review that we're talking about going on would occur before we move forward with the scope. That would be to confirm that. And anytime you're doing any sort of design, if we run into a roadblock that suggests that there's a better alternative, we're going to stop and back up. So yes, that is correct right now. But
So the clarification just is that the peer review will confirm that, or will review the assumptions that were made that went into the decision associated with the revertment seawall design. And then if there are any assumptions that are found in that peer review that are not consistent, then there may be some alternative decisions.
Any other? Ms. Spacey?
I'm just a little confused. I've heard that there are 4 options potentially, and now Mrs. Wendy Huntoon is saying there's actually 1. So I'm a little unsure that I appreciate this,
again, it's back to what I was saying earlier about, I think the number one concern that I have is the voice that we heard at that meeting and so on, was that because stone embeddment was much less. So the point of this peer review was, we've had some people come forward and say, I think we can build a wall version at less money, that's still just as durable. And if those costs come down, that's when we would revisit. So there's 4 of those options. Again, some of them are going to have to work on this geo design data set that we would need. But we would look at it, so that's the point. So there are these 4, right, that the engineer has sort of scored as the highest. And I don't think we're going back beyond that, okay, because that would be, to me, as far as we would go. I think we're really looking at probably something that's similar to the way it is, okay, that can be done in a crib fashion, because it doesn't have a point load, it's spread out, and it doesn't require as much geo work or the stone embeddment for the same reason.
Okay, just so that we don't get too far away, I'm just going to remind you that Article 8 is about funding, consulting, and engineering fees. Yes?
Steph, I just have one question. You keep throwing out geo design and the following the turnaround. Could you take a moment to explain that? Yeah, so whatever, any wall that we want to build, right, it's going to sit on something. It's going to sit probably on clay up there. And if it sits on clay, it has the ability to move. So we would need to do warnings and determine what we would need to do for the sub-base structure for that wall. So that's just jargon for the work that's got to be done? Yes. Okay, I just wasn't following you. Yeah, great.
Any other questions or comments on Article 8? Mr. Webster?
I just want to be sensitive to the infrastructure committee, which has done an enormous amount of work on this and will be over the next year. And I think it would be in the committee's best interest, and the public seems to have a lot of questions about this, as to what we're going to be asked to vote on next year. Because it sounds like he did have his presentation in June, it's been put up there for people to view. And you have to, at some point, narrow down what you're looking at. And it sounds like you narrowed it down to the revetment, although some options are still open. But over the next year, you're going to be going down a path to bring to the voters next August a budget, I assume, that says this is what we want to do and this is how much it's going to cost. And if the people that are voting on that decide at that point we don't want a revetment, then all the work you've done is for naught at that point. So I don't know if there's anything that you can say to address that. One thing you already said, Mike, was if you have input, you better give it to them soon, because they are going down this path. And it'd be a little unfair come next August to say, well, I don't like the revetment, while you have a chance through this whole process to say that you didn't like the revetment to be considered. But I think it's the infrastructure committee and the board of voters here that actually decide what gets brought to the voters next August.
Yes, and if we continue on the line where we are with the silver that the biggest issue is money. It's the biggest issue of all. And part of the design, when I get the scope of work from them, and make sure that what's in that is a public meeting for next summer. Because we really need to discuss the alternatives for parking, open format where everybody can have their opinion on it. So that's something that we would definitely do if that was sort of where, if we continue down this pathway.
Okay, Article 8 reads to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to withdraw from reserves to fund consulting and engineering studies for the repair of the seawall, withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $25,000. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. In the back, there's a supplemental warrant. On one side is supplemental 5, and on the other is Article 18. I am going to suggest that we insert Article 18 now after Article 8, unless there's an objection from anybody. Article 18 is to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to withdraw from reserves to fund consulting and engineering design studies to stabilize the banking at the end of North Street. Withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $10,000. Do we have a motion from Mr. Lannon and Mrs. Huntoon seconded? Who is going to address Article 18? Mr. Lannon?
Yes. So this one will be much shorter than the last one.
Can you put the microphone right in front of your...
Sure. Just
flip it over.
Okay. All right. I felt like I was too loud before. All right. So at the end of North Street, there's a storm drain that is basically a dry well that goes out into the bank, and we now have about 6 feet of exposed pipe, and it's very steep there, and we need to do something soon, or we're worried there's going to be a landslide down at the end of North Street. So this is to fund this work. We're looking at it from 2 points of view. One would be to look at it from a full rebuild of the area, and also another sort of patch job, which we talked about. And the point of bringing this article forward now is that if we did use the engineering company that's doing the seawall work, we could back this on it and hopefully save some money by buying the two together.
Any questions for Mr. Lannon? Article 18 is to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize I'm sorry, Mr. Power.
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
So okay. So we need to figure out how we want to fix it on this one. It's not just to put something back, which is going to require the extra funds. And then also, this isn't just part of the normal infrastructure budget that, like other roads and drains and things, it doesn't fall into that already. We need extra money.
We really don't have any money set aside for shoreline erosion, which, again, when I get to my report, we can talk about that, because I will actually talk about that to some extent.
Okay, I assumed it might just be in other parts of the budget already, and I wanted to understand why it was a separate thing. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Stolberg?
May I kindly request that the speakers use the microphone so that we can better hear their questions, please?
Yeah, I did mention that at the beginning and ask everybody to please, make an effort to use the microphone. I think it's portable and we could pass it down if you do need it. Thank you. Any other questions on Article 18? Article 18 is to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to withdraw from reserves to fund consulting and engineering design studies to stabilize the banking at the end of North Street. Withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $10,000. All those in favor of Article 18 is read. All those opposed, motion carries. We're back now on Article 9 to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers to withdraw from assigned reserves to fund the purchase of a new police cruiser using funds specifically set aside for that purpose. Withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $1,500. Motion on Article 9 by Ms. and seconded by Mrs. Metcalf. Who would like to address Article 9? Mrs. Huntoon?
So we have an opportunity to replace the current police cruiser with a newer model which has improved equipment. We also expect to have fewer maintenance requirements than the current cruiser. We also have the opportunity to recoup some of the funds through the sale of the current cruiser, as well as through some donations towards the purchase of the new vehicle.
Any questions on Article 9?
What I would add to that is we already have a $500 donation, so the purchase price is down to $1,000. We're upgrading 10 model years, so it's a pretty significant change. And think at the end of the day, we have $7,000 in assigned reserves specifically to replace cruisers. It seems like this would be a good time to do so.
Any other questions on Article 9? Article 9 is to see if the Northport Village Corporation will vote to authorize a majority of the overseers of the corporation to withdraw from assigned reserves to fund the purchase of a new police cruiser using funds specifically set aside for that purpose. Withdrawal from reserves not to exceed $1,500. All those in favor? All those opposed? Motion carries. Article 10 is to fix the rate of interest on taxes delinquent after September 1, 2018, equal to that amount charged by the town of Northport. Mrs. Metcalf, motion and seconded by Mrs. Huntoon. Mrs. Metcalf, you want to address that, please?
This is the reminder that if you don't pay your taxes on time, you will be subject to interest. This is the time that I always have to tell you I don't know how much the interest is because it's set by Northport. What's important here is you'll recall last year we changed the due date on our tax bills. You're probably all remembering November 30th, and last year went September 1st, and this is the second year that's done September 1st. So if you all get home to your other house, you'll find that your tax bills are sitting there waiting for you based on what you approved last year, not what you approved today. So pay bills.
Any other questions on Article 10? All those in favor of Article 10? All those opposed? Motion carries. The next articles are going to be different, and this will be the only year that they will be different. Every year we usually have one article for the election of the officers and one article for the overseers, but because we've gone to extended 3-year terms, we've broken it up this year. Not to make it complicated, we'll try to make it as efficient as possible. But Article 11 is to elect by written ballot a president for the Northport Village Corporation for a term of 3 years. Ms. Einstein is chairman of the nominating committee. You have Mr. Cressy, I'm sorry.
For president, the committee nominates John Spritz for a 3-year term.
Are there any nominations from the floor for the office of president? Hearing none, I'll declare the nominations closed and ask Mr. Cressy if he will submit the 3 ballots to the clerk. I will preface by saying one more time that anybody who is an eligible voter can be appointed or elected to any office. The additional requirement is that the clerk of the village corporation also be a resident of the state of Maine. Nominations from the floor do not need to be seconded. Article 12 is to elect by written ballot a treasurer for the Northport Village Corporation for a term of 2 years. Mr. Einstein?
Yes, we nominate Steve Hazelhoff.
Are there any other nominations for treasurer from the floor? Hearing none, I'll close nominations for treasurer and ask the nominating committee to submit ballots for Mr. Kazlonis. And Article 13 is to elect by written ballot a clerk for the Northport Village Corporation for a term of 1 year. Mr. Cressy?
The committee nominates for clerk for a 1-year term Maureen Einstein, also known as Beanie.
Are there any other nominations from the floor for clerk of the Village Corporation? Hearing none, I'll close the nominations and ask them to submit the written ballots. The written ballot, just as a point, is not one of those quirky rules of the Village Corporation. It happens to be a state law, so.
Mr. Moderator?
Mr. Moderator, yes.
I just want to clarify for everybody that last year, you the voters agreed that the overseers and officers would move to 3-year terms. And so we're now in this slightly funky mode for a year or two, where to get staggered terms, some of us are being elected 3 years now, next year, and it'll change each year. So that's why the numbers are what they are. So it's, and we had to sort of do a little quick math a few months ago to get to this point. Yeah. But that's what we're having. And then in about 2 years, we'll all be, everyone at this table will be elected to 3 consecutive 3-year terms will be on that cycle.
Something like that. Okay. Article 14 is to elect by written ballot 3 overseers for the Northport Village Corporation for 3-year terms. Mr. Cressy? Ms. Einstein, you guys confusing me.
We nominate Michael Lannon, Vicki Matthews, and Judy Metcalf for 3 years.
Are there any nominations from the floor for the office of overseer for a 3-year term? Hearing none, I'll close the nominations and ask the nominating committee to submit ballots for Mr. Lannon, Ms. Matthews, and Mrs. Metcalf. Article 15 is to select by written ballot 2 overseers for the Northport Village Corporation for 2-year terms. Mr. Cressy.
The committee nominates Lee Holton and Michael Terrell for overseer for a 2-year term.
Are there any other nominations from the floor for overseer for 2-year terms? Hearing none, I will close the nominations for the 2-year terms and submit the ballots. Article 16 is to elect by written ballot 2 overseers for the Northport Village Corporation for 1-year terms.
Yes. We nominate Wendy Huntoon and Dick Rothman for 1-year terms.
Are there any other nominations for overseer for 1-year terms? Hearing none, I'll close the nominations and ask that you submit the ballots for 2 overseers for the Northport Village Corporation for 1-year terms. And 2 things, I would like to congratulate the overseers who have been re-elected and the new overseer. Where is Michael Terrell? Michael Terrell is our new overseer, and just as a reminder that after this meeting, the overseers will meet downstairs so that the clerk can swear everybody in. Now, before we go to adjournment, don't forget that, we're going to do committee reports, and I'm going to, thank you, Mr. President. I am going to start on page 14 and go through page 14 to the end. And the first one is to ask the President if he wants to add anything to his report.
The only thing I want to add is I want to welcome Michael Terrell to the Board of Overseers. Thank you very much, sir, for standing up for this. And I'd like to thank Paul Nyron, who is not with us tonight. Paul served several years as an overseer, and it's no secret that oftentimes there were discussions got sharp-elbowed in terms of process and policy, but I think that Paul always has had, as everyone at this table does, the best interests of the village at heart, and I have been very grateful for the service that he has given to the village.
Thank you, Paul. Treasurer's report, Mr. Casalunas, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nothing to add.
Okay. Governance and Communications Committee, Mrs. Metcalf.
The Governance and Communications report is on page 18 through 19 of the report.
Yeah,
Governance work in particular has been devoted to revising the fire ordinance, and there's a cheat sheet here telling you what you can and cannot do. We had a public hearing on some drafts that we had circulated, and as a consequence of the public hearing, we incorporated the comments of the public and adopted the ordinance, and I'm really grateful for the people who took that seriously and who are now taking the enforcement obligations seriously. There is a fine, and you will pay if you violate the ordinance. Michael's anxious to do that. What we've been working on and what will require your continued efforts and attention is a review of our zoning ordinance. It was most recently extensively adopted in 2000. It has been modified in a small clerical way in 2005. And we have been engaged in almost monthly meetings, in workshops. The committee has worked very hard. It's Angela Cassidy, it's John Spritz, Dick Brockway, Tim Samway, and Blair Einstein, with the very able assistance of Dan Webster, who has been very diligent in keeping us on task and making sure we attend to the business at hand. On Sunday of Labor Day weekend at 9 a.m., there will be a public hearing on the revisions that the governance committee will be presenting to the overseers for their review. Please come. I know that's a busy weekend, but we really benefited from the public comments on the fire ordinance, and we really want your input. What we have been focusing on is clarity of language. What does that mean? In our workshops, if we have come up with two different ideas of what something means, we have tried to eliminate one of those, because clarity is key for land use regulations. What we have not grappled with, because we didn't feel that a body of 5 people should grapple with it without further input from you, is what is your vision of the community? What aesthetic choices should we be memorializing in an ordinance? We have had a lot of commentary about architectural review when we walk down the street. We've had a lot of commentary about setbacks. We've had a lot of commentary about a lot of things. At the public meeting, we want that to be not only a comment on the existing documents that we're working on, but also we want you to start sharing your vision with us. And throughout the winter, we will be continuing to workshop that. In the spring, we will have a public hearing. We will probably have another public hearing, and we'll be presenting to you all next annual meeting, if you want one, a zoning ordinance that may go further than this one. So this is a long process, and we want you to be part of it. We are really grateful to Dan Webster and his family for their website, because it helps us talk to you throughout the winter, and please do talk to us. I may not always respond to the email that you send me about, gee, this is an interesting question, and I wonder how it affects my house, but we certainly are talking about that question that you posed at our meetings. So thank you very much. I'm sorry that your report was longer than usual.
Thank you. Infrastructure Committee, Mr. Lannon.
Yeah, I'm going to be much shorter than that. Community hall, we talked about it a bit with Steve about the windows, and we already finished the wiring this fall. That's why it's not on the list. We're actually planning to do that as soon as all the activities in this space slow down and stop. We'll be able to come in and shut the power off and do wire. The wharf, we talked about the wharf. We are looking at this proactive maintenance program where we're going to replace the nuts and bolts prior to them failing, which it's funny because I haven't been here all that long, and everybody calls the thing the new wharf still. I guess everybody else it's the new wharf. So, but to me, it's looking a little old, so we do need to maintain it, and we need to be a little proactive. Roads, as I mentioned before, the focus is usually on some of the more heavily traveled roads, and as a result, some of the smaller roads have really not been updated in quite some time. And we are working on that. Anybody who lives on one of those roads has received a letter from the village, and this is my time to say, if you have any questions about what's going to happen in front of your driveway, or if there's going to be a ditch where there isn't a ditch there now, and you usually like to park there, just remember that, one, that is village property. Most of the houses, the property ends at the porch. So most of the front yard is actually owned by the village. So we are willing to work with people. I'd love to work it out however works best, but I need to know what the issues are if anybody has any. So people that receive letters on those roads, please contact us, myself or Billy, and we can move forward with that. The seawall, we beat that one up quite a bit. That's going to progress throughout the next year. And the last thing, getting back to your comment earlier, is we are taking sort of a more of a proactive approach to the village to try to get some of these things that we seem to be spending a lot of money on maintenance or last-minute repairs. North Street is a good example of one. And we plan to sort of assess all the public shoreline in the village, kind of get an idea of what we think the long-term plan should be for some of that. Just here's a little maintenance here and there would go a long way to having to spend tens of thousands to rebuild some sort of plan. That's it in a nutshell. See you next year.
The next one, just I'll do this. The next one is the Safety Committee, Mrs. Hunter. Mrs. Hunter, before you start your report, would you introduce the gentleman in front of you to welcome him? The gentleman in the yellow shirt.
What gentleman? There's no gentleman. So I guess like to just remind you of my dad, Joe Mattoon, came out today to the meeting. My son, the dean, brought him. Just like Adelaide, my dad has been coming to Maine almost every summer of his life. I think he missed one, and I think he was in the Korean War stationed in Germany at the time. So yes, my dad's here. Please make sure you come say hi to him before you leave.
Now your Safety Committee report.
Yeah, thanks. I guess I just take it for granted. So first, I'd just like to thank the Safety Committee for all their hard work, and we actually do a fair amount of work year-round. So thank you all for being so supportive of the work we do. I'd also like to thank, and I don't think they're here, but Evan and Mackenzie for the wonderful job they've done lifeguarding this year. We actually did have Evan save someone, or I should say rescue someone this summer. So if we ever think that it's not important to have a lifeguard, I think the summer definitely demonstrated that it's important. Just a misstep, and you could be in the water and not expect to be. Also, please say hello to our police chief, Michael Boucher, who's standing in the back of the room. Please make sure you say hello to him before you leave. We've been very fortunate to have him here for the whole summer. If you recall, last summer you did have someone start until mid-August. And just a reminder that Officer Boucher, while we are primarily paying him during the summer season, he is employed for us for the full year, which does mean that if there are work cases or anything like that, he will be going and representing us then as well. And finally, I just wanted to let you know that there is a safety committee meeting this Friday at 4 p.m. Meeting on time has graciously agreed to host it. So if you have any comments, concerns, please come to the meeting and let us know. Thank you.
Utilities Committee, Mr. Crowfoot.
I think that I hit all the high points in my report. We have the good fortune that when we detect a leak in our water system, which we see additional usage at nighttime where there should be none, you have to go out and look all over the village for whose water is leaking. And this tends to happen in the winter when people's houses freeze up, or they thought they had a heated line and it's not heated. But Billy does yeoman work, you know, some of it by intuition, some of it by logical deduction to find where such a leak is. If we notify Dan and it appears that we have a water leak and he notifies you, you might want to have your caretaker come check your house so that you don't see that there are thousands of gallons of water leaking over your hardwood floors, all of which you're paying for. So that's important to pay attention to notifications of water leaks. We're happy with the function of our sewer system. We haven't had a violation in years, and the work that is done on it continues to work very well. By now you've gotten used to the notion that we change the months that you receive your utilities bills, and so you're now receiving them in March, July, and November, some of which had to do with getting payments into the right fiscal year, and some of it had to do with trying to even out the work to times that Bill Page has to do for installation, deinstallation, so that to spread the work out more evenly over the year. We don't have any huge projects. We are planning to do some project on Cove Road to replace the water line on Cove Road, which is a very thin little thing with many more houses serving, but being served. And the other big news is that when they applied to us for the right to install a sprinkler system at the school, we had to do pressure testing on our water. Our water comes by an 8-inch main from the Belfast Water District and comes all the way underground from Little River to here. And we found, to our surprise, that actually the pressures in the pipes were much better than we thought. Some of that, I think, is due to improvements in the lines that were made within the town of Belfast. But at any rate, it encouraged us, in addition to having the school be sprinkled, to consider the installation of real working fire hydrants with an 8-inch pipe and a head of pressure. And so one was done this year. We've worked with the overseers to identify sites for placement of 2 more lines that will be done next year. The upfront money for that comes from the water users' utility. I mean, it's paid for by the water users. They are reimbursed by the village with a hydrant fee, so it takes at least 7 or 8 years for us to have upfronted money that is going to come back into the system. But the utility has to take ownership of that because it's coming from your potable water system, and so we have to be responsible for the installation. The overseers decide where they need to go. But I love the fire pond hydrants, but they really did not provide you with anything but the appearance of a hydrant should you have a fire.
Mr. Woolsey?
Do we know if the proposed salmon farm in Belfast goes forward? Do we know if that has any impact on our water supply?
Keith Pooler, who is the head of the Belfast Water District, came and talked with the Utilities Committee. They did pressure testing in which they basically opened up the hydrants just upstream of Little River and started pulling out 500 gallons a minute, which is the amount that the salmon farm would be allowed to take, and it had a negligible effect on pressure and volume. They're currently using less than 1 million gallons a year of water. In years past, when there were 2 poultry plants in town, they were pumping up to 3 million gallons a year out of their aquifer. So in terms of volume and in terms of pressure, we are not concerned that those are issues. All the other issues having to do with the salmon farm have to do with whether or not they can treat what they create, and that has to go through all of the permitting of DEP and EPA, and I assume that the scrutiny of that will be stringent. But from the standpoint of pressure and supply, we are not concerned.
Thank you. Mr. Riley, the Bayside Historical Preservation Society, you have 32 seconds. 29.
It's so nice to not have Judy talk about toilets and sewers right before I speak. I want to start I have 1 page, it'll be real quick. I'd like to start my time with a clarification. Those of you who were here last year remember the Rob Sherman age controversy. Rob's birthday is December 19th, 1930. That makes the true age of our friend Rob Sherman over there 87 until December when, according to Joy, he will become 88. And he's still willing to be hired out for jobs. Second, Heidi von Bergen is not only our capable treasurer, but she's also on the board of the BHPS, so if you could add that being to, I don't know if you add that or not. But more seriously, I want to talk about what Steve brought up earlier, and Mike as well. The BHPS would like to thank Beverly Crowfoot and Kathy Ross for their leadership in the funding drive for the new windows here in the community hall. Amy sent us a note a little while earlier this month, and here's a portion of her note. For several years, the focus of the village project spending has been to ensure our roads, community hall, and storage and utility buildings, and ensure that the community hall, storage, and utility buildings are properly maintained. We have paid for those projects via a combination of contingency funds, donations, and borrowing. On a very positive note, the refurbishment of the community hall windows cost $16,950. Generous donations from the community paid for all but $1,900 of this badly needed work. To refurbish these windows cost around $800 a piece. That's 17 families in the BHPS made contributions to this restoration. Many of those families wish to remain anonymous, but Amy does have the list. So you can go down and check it out. The BHPS would like to wholeheartedly thank all of those involved in this significant accomplishment. It's a big deal. Once again, the generosity of our friends and neighbors in Bayside has been overwhelming.
Bayside Arts, Mr. Woolsey.
Try to make it quick. We've had a good season. In particular, if you came to our classical music concert on July 15th, we had 90 people in here. It was fabulous. Come to our jazz concert tomorrow night. It was great last year. It's going to be just as good this year. And I want to particularly thank Sheila Allen, who has been doing 6 art classes for kids. She's had up to 25 kids per class, which is just amazing. So we're onward and upward.
Bayside Library, Janica Lundy.
Do not have a bill set.
Wharf Master, Mr. Fuller, would you like to add anything to your report?
Good evening. I'll try to be brief. The 420s are off the outfloat, and the secondary float that had another 420 out there are all bare. If you have a dinghy that is out of compliance, get it the hell off the float. Put them up on the deck. That'll give you a little incentive, perhaps, because it'll be very safe out there. We're really not by the dinghy crisis yet, and there's enough been said about that this year. You can read about it in my report if you wish, but just a couple more things with the dinghies. If your name's not in the dinghy, it gets loose, somebody finds it, they can't do anything to help you. I highly encourage you to put your name in, because it will also help some of us who are trying to make sure that some of the rules are enforced. If we don't know it's your dinghy and we don't know you're here and around, very apt to not be there the next time you come down. It may be out on the outfloat, so look out there. So put your names in them, bail them out. If you don't bail them out, it's an indication you're not around, and it's also putting an excessive load on the boat float that nobody ever thinks about. It's not an impossible thing to imagine in a storm that every one of those dinghies is on the shore because that railing breaks loose or whatever. So do your part if you can on the dinghies. Boaters, stay out of the swim zone if possible, and I really don't know why you need to be in the swim zone. Even sailboats, you just come into the float a little slower, you can stay out of the swim zone. I'd like to thank the lifeguards, and again, read the report if you wish, because the more of us that will work to solve some of these problems, the easier it'll be for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Mr. Page, is there anything that you want to add to your report?
Just one thing I'd like to add. I'd like to thank Rob Sherman and Dick Brockway for all their volunteer help they do for this community.
The tree warden report, Mrs. Matthews, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yes. We run
wrote these reports at the beginning of the summer, and we weren't quite sure, I wasn't quite sure where the tree committee was going to go. So first of all, I want to thank the 6 community members who have met almost, it seems like every other week, to talk about trees and how we're going to deal with our many, 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 many beautiful trees in the community. So we've got to start and trying to put something together as far as how to manage the community trees, and hopefully in the future it will integrate with the infrastructure committee, and we'll have something that can be taken forward. If we maintain them properly, take care of them properly, they'll live longer, they'll be happier, and not be a costly mistake. Right now, we are looking for a tree warden again, so if anybody has any interest in trees, it's a liaison position, so pass the word around. We can train you. And that's it. Thank you.
We have tree t-shirts coming, so if you want to be on the tree committee, you might want to get a tree t-shirt. Just saying.
The Northport Yard Club annual report, Mr. Facey, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Nothing to add, I'd just like to happily announce that I'm no longer a councilor.
And the last on the list is the food pantry. This is, where's Pat? Oh, there you are, hiding in the back.
It's always hard to be last to make this meeting last longer, but thank you very much. In fact, thank you for everything. Poverty in a rural place like Waldo County can be extremely lonely and isolating. We are a majority elderly food pantry. We serve people that really don't have the option of working their way out of their poverty. They've worked their days already. If our numbers go down in our pantry, sadly, it is often because one of our clients has passed away due to age. The majority of the new clients we get are the young families of Waldo County, and particularly lately of Northport itself. And they have particular challenges, and it's been our pleasure to be able to serve all of them. Running a food pantry, I hear from peer organizations, can be an incredibly lonely and isolating experience. I have to say, in this particular community, though, that's not the case. This, indeed, is a community. You all, in fact, are the adoptive families of some of Waldo County's neediest families. Thank you for the many ways that you support. You've given your money, you've given your time. I'd like to particularly thank some members of Bayside that have been coming out regularly to help at the pantry, including Ned Leitner, Gordon Fuller, Jean and Jim Coughlin, Deirdre Good, Jamie Sapo, the Lundy family in its entirety, and particularly their wonderful children. It's always difficult when you start naming people because you're going to forget somebody. Kathy and Jim Ross for their tireless enthusiasm and helpfulness. And the willingness of all the volunteers that have offered their help. And we've had a bounty of good help this summer, but I still have your name on the list. And you'll get a call. There are very simple things you can do. There are bottles and cans at Northport Redemption. I frequently get asked, can we really trust that you're getting the money from those bottles and cans? I vouch for Lisa. Lisa helps us at the pantry. She's a very good person. I cannot tell you that we get every nickel that's dropped off there. They get very busy some days, but I can tell you we regularly get checks from the Northport Redemption. I've been alerted to a program through Amazon Prime called Amazon Smile. If you're an Amazon Prime member, apparently you can designate a charity, and a teeny little percentage of your purchase will be donated to the charity of your choice, and we have registered with them. We do have some people that are taking advantage of that. And to prove that pennies add up, the jar at the Bayside store last year produced over $600 for the pantry. So pennies do matter. And you can always send mail to Post Office Box 27 at the Lincolnville Post Office, which is the pantry's mailing address. For bigger things, volunteers are always needed. If you have a truck, you get a special crown. But I just want to thank you all, the people at the pantry, when I run into them in other aspects of life, like at our yard sale or in Belfast. I'm proudest of all to say that they like us, that they feel that we treat them in a warm and friendly way. And that's really, that they go away not feeling like they've done something wrong because they had an hour of need. And that's our goal, and I think our pantry is accomplishing that. So thank you so much for
Stay right there. This is right. We have one additional announcement to make regarding the food pantry. This Sunday, the 19th, you finish that up, please.
We have one additional announcement to make regarding the food pantry. This Sunday, the 19th, we all will be having a food drive. We're asking residents to bring a food item or items here to the community hall next Sunday. If you won't be here on Sunday, you can go ahead and leave the donated food on the food steps, front steps, or on the young porch, or back your van full of food items and leave them on patio lights. Every year at the annual meeting, we reminded the residents to think about the food pantry as they close their cottages for the season. And for those who live here year-round, we ask that you check your cupboards for extras, or maybe when you go to the market this week, you pick up a few extra items. There are always special 3 for $5 or something like that. Tuna fish, peanut butter, yams soup, beans, packages of pasta, anything you think some family will need. In Portsmouth, New Hampshire, there is a 100-year-old music hall in the downtown area, and the local food pantry uses the music hall every year for the food drive. The tagline is, "Let's fill the music hall seats with bags of food." Jim and Kathy Ross have a photo of the music hall that was taken the day after the food drive. It's an impressive photo, and we hope that we can borrow an idea for Bayside. Steve Nelson has taken a photo of the empty seats. Next Sunday or Monday, we'll take another photo with the seats filled with food bags. But we need your help. We have some 75 filled with food bags, but we need your help. We have some 75 people here tonight. We need you to tell your neighbors about the food drive. We'll ask Dan Webster to put it out in a couple of the reminders. This place is called the Community Hall for a reason. It's our chance to continue to act as a community, helping out the Northport food. It started over 15 years ago with the Junior Yacht Club collecting cans and bottles for the food pantry. It has continued with Patty Wright and the committee doing auctions and raffles. And we hope that this food drive, filled with community hall, is the start of another annual event. Let's get together and do this.
Here are the bags. We've got 3 bags full of these. Not only so they're going to be sitting in the chairs, and then when they go to the food bank, the people will now, each person will have a bag that they can take their food back and forth in. So we need your help. We need cans, and what we're going to do, even if you come in, if you put 1 can in a bag, that's okay. We just want the whole thing full because we're sure they're going to get some publicity and that other towns will see what Bayside has done or other schools, and they'll say, we can do that too. And Tim is the one, Tim Stanley.
Stop.
He's gonna cry, but Tim is the one that came up with this idea, and his friend helped us get it. Please, let's give Tim. Here, here, Tim. Could I just suggest a couple of things? Right now, we do have difficulty in securing breakfast cereal or breakfast foods and peanut butter. They're not available through Good Shepherd at the moment. So if those are a couple of items that you might think about putting in those bags, that would be a tremendous immediate help to us. Thank you so much for wonderful sharing.
Does anybody have any questions or comments before I ask for adjournment? Mr. Cressy is a former overseer. Would you make a motion for adjournment? And Mr. Woolsey is a former overseer. Would you second that motion? All those in favor? The meeting is adjourned.